My life changed on September 11th. It propelled me to study Arabic in college. It inspired me to study Middle East history in college. After college, I taught English to Iraqi refugees in Damascus, Syria. That experience led me to join the Army, where as an intelligence officer in the Army Rangers, I served 4 combat deployments to Afghanistan. I subsequently worked inside in an investment bank to investigate internal fraud. Our campaign is based on our platform is based on a very simple idea. Whether it's a mid-shore or the entire district, this is a fantastic place to raise a family. There are traditions in this room that I bet go back 5 generations, and it draws people in. But we have to give our young people a reason to stay. That is jobs of the future, like solar and cyber, and it means attacking with every ounce of courage and political energy we can muster the urgent problems of right now. That's healthcare, that's the opioids epidemic. We also have the Chesapeake Bay. We're the only district in the country with the Chesapeake Bay and its way of life. I want to get to 10 billion oysters by 2025. The last thing I want to say is, I've said this in every forum on camera as possible, we are committed to running an incredibly positive campaign. And if for some reason we don't receive the nomination, I personally will throw my full support and ask my supporters to throw their full support behind whoever the nominee is. So thank you very much for having us, and I'm really looking forward to today. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Erik Lane. I'm from Harford County, born and raised there, and educated through the local high school system, went on to University of Maryland, got a mechanical engineering degree, became an entrepreneur, have an MBA from University of California, Berkeley, and Columbia University. Spent 8 years in Silicon Valley after I left here to go pursue technology. Was very successful there and understand technology very well. Moved back here about 14 years ago, and now own a farm up in northern Harford County. Times are changing for many of us, and we have a couple issues that are really driving my candidacy. One of them is we have a population challenge right now, where we're having less kids. And if we have less kids, that means the tax base is going to go down in the next 10 years or so. That means pensions are going to be under incredible pressure. That means the economy is going to be under a lot of pressure. Your home values are going to be under a lot of pressure. We need to make some changes, or at least get ready to adapt for this new future. And that's what I'm looking towards. It's a little bit of a different perspective than today's challenges, but we have changes that need to come in education, and I think vocational education needs to find its sexy again. I think we need to deal with the immigration issue in a more positive way, and I think we need to have more ears listening and less voices talking. I think we have an environmental issue, being the Chesapeake Bay, that you'll find a pretty common message from all of us, that we find this very important to us here. And how do we influence federal funds to be able to support our community for this delicate ecosystem? Putting all those things together, I bring a conservative fiscal restraint to my campaign, and that's what I hope you learn a little bit more about tonight. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Worton. Immigration, I can just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the grandson of Polish immigrants. They lived in Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, and mined coal, so I'm really against what President Trump's trying to do. I think this country was built on immigrants, and I'm for affordable care. No surprise there. A little bit more, I worked for the federal government for 34 years. I was at the Pentagon for quite a while, Congress. I've testified before Congress. I've written legislation. I've supported budgets, and actually had to go to the Senate and fight with them for money to destroy the U.S. stockpile of chemical weapons. And so we've all heard each other's stump speech, and I'm going to tell you a little bit different story. After 9/11, or during 9/11, I was in San Antonio, Texas, at one of my sites, because I had 3,000 people around the world. So I was visiting there, and the planes hit. They also hit the Pentagon, and I had a friend. His wife worked in a secure area in a vault in the Pentagon. Well, when those planes hit, the jet fuel from that jet liner seeped into the Pentagon and created essentially an inferno in the basement. And the poor guy took and would run over there, and the firefighters were there, and he asked if he could go into the basement to try and help save his wife because he thought she was in a secure area. So I kind of saw everything that happened after 9/11, and the point of this is Republicans and Democrats after 9/11 came together. The country really pulled together to make things work. But today, we don't have that. Today, we have the skyrocketing spending, major cuts for the rich. We have cuts planned for Medicare and Social Security from the Republican. We have drugs with no solutions. President Trump and EPA are kind of destroying our environment and taking money from the Bay. So I'll vote to change all that, and I hope you vote for me. So please come out and vote June 26th, and thank you very much for coming.
My name is Michael Pullen. Our campaign is Pullen for Us. And on June 26th, I hope you in the voting booth are pulling for us. I was a trial lawyer since 1977. I became the county attorney in Talbot County about 25 years ago. Served with 7 different county councils, worked with both Republicans and Democrats, developing legislation, effective legislation to solve real practical problems. But this election is not about me and it's not about the other candidates. It's about you. It's about your families and your loved ones. It's about the values that we share as a people and as a nation. We've seen an uptick in racism and bigotry and hatred in Charlottesville, Virginia. We've heard the lies and the propaganda and the daily assault on our free press. We've experienced the utter disregard and contempt for the rule of law, for the intelligence agencies, for our law enforcement agencies, and for the courts. And while we have to stand together and fight for what we believe in, we're at a crossroads, and we also have to work together with those with whom we disagree to find common solutions to our problems. I have the experience and the understanding to do that. I've represented waitresses, watermen, farmers, firemen, families, small businesses, and local governments for my entire career. And whether you vote for me or not, I want you to know that if you elect me as your congressman, when I'm in the room, you're in the room. When I'm on the floor, you're on the floor. And so I'm asking for your support and your vote. But I also want you to know that regardless of the outcome of this election, that I'm in this, that this is too big of a moment in history for me to walk away. And I'm in this for my family, my kids, my grandkids. We share a common destiny. We're in this together, and together we can win. Thank you.
I'm Allison Galbraith. I got into this race for a slightly different reason than most candidates get into politics at all, I believe. I went to go see Andy Harris for help. I told him that I started a small business after being laid off when my mother had a series of strokes. I said that I couldn't work a 9-to-5 job at the time, and that the only reason that I could keep that business as a single mother is because the Affordable Care Act said you could not charge women 30 to 80% more for the same policies, which didn't even cover maternity. And it took me 4 months to meet him. When I finally did, I asked him if he would vote against any legislation which allowed for gender rate hikes. And he told me that he didn't think most people would mind if women paid a little more for health insurance. 3 days later, my mother passed away. It had been a long, grueling 4 years, and she'd spent her entire career working towards universal health care and ending racial disparities in healthcare. And the one thing that I would say I learned from her is that you might not be able to erase the hardships that you faced, but you can make sure that other people do not face the same problem. So I got in here because I needed to fight to protect my own business, fight to care and provide for my own child, fight for the ability to continue helping out my father now that my mother has passed away. But I believe that I can do that for every family. Every family. I believe that a representative's job is to be available, to be responsive, to listen and to advocate on behalf of constituents. That they need to show up to do that, that they need to listen and care about people, have a heart. I believe that every family deserves the tools and the resources that they need to live in comfort, provide for their families, and to retire in comfort. I believe that we don't need bigger government or more spending or more taxes to do that. I believe that we need smarter government and wiser spending, and that's what I've worked with for the last 10 years.
Thank you.
I think implied in that question is the media cannot keep up with the number of stories coming out of Washington related to ethics today. There are 3 priorities that I would have. right off the bat. The first is there's a corporate campaign finance reform is something we desperately need. Campaign finance reform and gerrymandering are the two toxic elements in American politics today. A congressman from our state, Congressman Sarbanes, has the Buy the People Act, and it's the idea to end or overturn End Citizens United. Would love to be a part of that. Number two, the culture of sexual harassment on Capitol Hill is wildly out of control. Every policy, every procedure needs to be blown up and start over. That's the fund that we heard about in the recent months that the public does not have transparent views into. That's every policy, that's every rule. The third thing, I'll say this as delicately as possible, we are going to need rigorous oversight for what is happening at the EPA. What can I do? I've already started this. So let me just give you a couple examples. We've already signed up to never take corporate PAC money. I've already signed up to never take any sort of contribution from the extraction industries. I'm also endorsed by an organization called With Honor. With Honor is endorsing military veterans. There's a pledge. Number one, once a month in office, you'll get coffee with somebody from the other side of the aisle. Kind of sad that that's where we are, but here we are.
Yeah.
Number two, once a year, you'll co-sponsor a piece of legislation from somebody from the other side of the aisle. It could be the Girl Scouts. And number three, if you receive a contribution from a source that you find out after the fact will taint your reputation, you give it to charity. I couldn't have signed that thing faster. What can you do? You can find a representative in Congress who is beholden to their corporate PAC donors. Say, for example, the representative from Maryland's First, who's in the coal caucus. We have no coal in our district, and vote him out. Thank you.
So we've all experienced there's been lots of legislation pushed in this direction. And the problem that we have starts at the top. The leaders of each of the parties don't want to see that legislation go through because it's going to affect their day-to-day fundraising. That needs to change. And the only way it's going to change is through a change in elected officials. The way that I see it happening is we're going to bring up the various legislations from the different organizations and from the different congressmen that have been out there, and we're going to try to vote on that. But I have a feeling it's going to get stopped. It's going to be stopped by the lobbyists. It's going to be stopped by the existing folks who have been sitting on their laurels for quite a few years. I believe that it's time for us to have a congressional ethics caucus, a group of like-minded representatives who are willing to go in and say, hey, we are going to hold our peers accountable within this body for their bad actions. The problem is, all this stuff that we do as legislation is going to take a long time for this to happen, and it's not going to go through normal channels. It needs to be a body that is willing to have some teeth amongst each other. And I think the right way to do it is we create this caucus, and that caucus becomes the committee that basically evaluates the right and wrong, whether it's in fundraising, whether it's in improprieties with staff, improprieties with fundraising entities that are supporting you. We need to have a group that's going to have the teeth, and I don't think legislation is going to walk in the door and solve this problem. I think it has to come from the body. It needs to be the new generation of leaders coming into Congress.
I'll get to the legislation in just a bit. As people probably know, there's a total of 80 people in the federal government that really kind of have oversight over the government ethics, if you will. They have about a $16 million budget, so giving them subpoena power probably wouldn't work very well because they really don't have the expertise, manpower, and background. There are multiple avenues for folks to protect them, if you will. That was in your question. Really, there are so many federal rules and regulations on ethics that are available now, and so many thousands of people in the federal government to provide a guidepost for folks to make sure they don't violate these ethics, that it's just shocking it continues to happen. For example, Mr. Kushner has amended his federal filing 40+ times now. Private jets being used by Scott Pruitt. The dining room set for Mr. Carson, $31,000. Kellyanne Conway endorsing the Ivanka Trump clothing line, for which the penalty was that got referred to President Trump, who had to decide what her penalty was. She's still around. President Trump not divesting himself of his investments. So there's a lot that's going on. The only way that you fix this is by creating some type of penalties for it. They could be criminal penalties, they could be removal. But until we put those in place, these actions will continue to happen because the president condemns them. And I would recommend that we take the Office of Government Ethics and that they refer anything, as they have in the past, either to a special prosecutor or to the FBI as the most knowledgeable people to pursue and prevent this from happening again. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I would support 3 separate bills that are pending in Congress at the moment. The first is H.R. 5902. It's been introduced by Jamie Raskin. It would change the law regarding the Office of Government Ethics. Currently, it's an advisory capacity only, which means it's a toothless tiger. His bill would give it subpoena power. His bill would also enable that office to conduct formal investigations and to issue a report to Congress. It would also clarify the scope of the current existing ethics conflict laws that would apply both to the White House and the executive branch agencies. In addition, it gets enforcement power, including divestiture, blind trusts, recusal, and also administrative penalties for employees who were found in violation, to include reprimand, suspension, and dismissal. So this puts real teeth in the existing laws that we need to have. The second one is a bill that's been introduced by Elizabeth Warren, and that bill would require both the President and the Vice President to preemptively disclose potential conflicts and to divest all of their holdings. And in addition, any nominee from a major presidential party would be required to disclose 3 years of their tax returns. The final bill that I would support is the Special Counsel Independence and Integrity Act, Senate Bill 2644. That would protect the special counsel because his firing involves a conflict of interest of the highest order and the most significant consequence. That would require that the special counsel be protected and can only be fired for malfeasance or for cause. It would require a written notice of the reasons for the firing, and it would give the special counsel an opportunity to appeal that decision to the federal court.
So I would also support the legislation that Mr. Pullen just mentioned. Those things I think are very important, and there are guidelines right now for ethics and ethical behavior of our Congress members. However, I believe it doesn't go far enough when it comes to conflict of interest. For instance, a federal contracting officer cannot own stocks in a company that they may award a contract to, but it's okay for a member of Congress to take a vote on regulating an industry in which they may own millions in stocks as long as it's publicly traded. We need to close that loophole. It shouldn't apply to Congress. They ought to be held to the same standards as with regard to conflict of interest as everybody else. I'd also support the American Anti-Corruption Act. That would do things like stop political bribery, make it illegal to take money from lobbyists, and secret money, so you can't hide your money or your donations behind a super PAC. Fix broken elections, ending gerrymandering, open primaries, and automatic voter registration, making sure that everybody is able to participate in our political process. You also need to enforce the rules that we already have better and give them some teeth, as Mike was saying. So you can eliminate a lot of these loopholes and you can strengthen anti-corruption acts that are in place, and I would certainly be happy to be a part of that. Also, with regard to donors, I actually don't have any maxed out donors, and I'm proud of that. I have gone after all small donors so that when I take a vote, it is for the best interest of the people at hand. We can't just change Congress, we have to change our political process also. Thank you. Long term, I believe that we need to work towards universal care, universal health care. I am a beneficiary of the ACA. I would not own a business today if it weren't for the ACA. The most important part of that in a lot of ways is the consumer protections that were built in. So long term, we need to move towards a system which is going to provide affordable care for everybody and make sure that nobody is denied due to a pre-existing condition, nobody has a lifetime cap, that things like dental and vision and mental health and substance abuse disorders are covered, treatment for those things. We need to be working towards that system right now because it is going to take a little bit of time to get there. In the meantime, with regard to the ACA, we have to band-aid it because for all its flaws, it's better than what we had before, and 8 out of 10 bankruptcies being related to medical bills. You can do reinsurance. You can expand the subsidies so that people who are struggling to pay their premiums have an easier time with it and don't have so much of a financial burden. You can have larger enrollment periods so that more people get enrolled into the state exchanges. You can fund the cost sharing reductions. You can make sure that we are protecting the essential health benefits, which are under attack currently, just as of this week. And we can go back to enforcing the individual mandate, which was repealed as part of the tax bill. Because more people have to be insured. That's how you offset these costs, and that's what's part of the prices going up are related to, is the fact that the individual mandate is not there, and insurance companies do not know how to price things. We also need cost-saving measures. We need to address prescription costs, and we can expand things like Maryland's all-payer system, which has been very, very successful in driving down actual healthcare costs themselves.
Brian, I support Medicare for all. We are the richest country in the history of the world. We pay more than any other nation for our health care. We pay on average $9,500 per person per year for health care, and we have less coverage, and we do not use more health care benefits. We pay, for example, we have 5% of the world's population, and yet we provide 60% of the worldwide profit for pharmaceutical drugs. 42 or 43 cents of every dollar we spend on healthcare goes to one of three things. Administrative costs for insurance companies. Medicare is 3%. Insurance companies are between 15 and 20%. Profits for insurance companies. Last year, United Healthcare, their profit, $9.6 billion, a 50% increase. Think about that. The third thing, prescription drugs. We need to eliminate the monopoly that the pharmaceutical industry has on prescription drug pricing. So we need to provide more coverage. Canada, for example, they pay about $4,600 per person per year. Very well satisfied with their health care system. Everyone is covered. So I'm in favor of universal health care. We can provide it universally for less money than we're spending now. It would be a far better system.
First, a little bit of history. So President Trump got in and promised to protect people with pre-existing conditions. And he also said he would repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. Of course, we know that he's tried to repeal it and that Republicans have come up with no way to take and replace it. We all know that the insurance premiums are going to go up for health care, I think, as you mentioned. But people forget that we just gave a 14% tax cut to all the big corporations, so they have even larger profits now and are raising the premiums. So something's clearly out of whack. What we really need to do is establish common rates for people with any kind of condition. That's going to be probably a long-term solution, but one I think we certainly need to have. The other thing is we need to force insurers to take and stay in every market. Right now, insurers can pick and choose which markets they stay in. They don't like to stay in the least profitable ones, and so they drop people from that or really raise the rates for those folks. So we've got to standardize those rates and force them to stay in one place. And then, as far as people on Medicare or Medicaid, some of the income levels that we're talking about for people to receive any kind of help are just ridiculous right now. I have a son, grown man, going to turn 26 and loses affordable care. Underneath of the Maryland exchange, if you will, because he lives with my ex-wife, his premiums and the amount he would have to pay as deductible would be almost $9,000 a year, but he barely makes $25,000 to $30,000 a year. So we have to actually change the limits and make them higher so that people can get more care. Michael mentioned Medicare for all. I think it's a grand idea and one that can happen, but it'll probably happen in increments because we cannot suffer the weight of trying to put everyone with insurance all at one time. So I would start by incrementally reducing the age for that as well. Thank you.
So the problem starts with the healthcare lobby. They are by far the single largest funding component of the lobby in Congress. They spend about $500 million a year, which dwarfs number 2 at about $125 million. Fundamentally, they are here to keep things broken. We have to get that money out. We can't fix anything if they're in the pockets of the majority of politicians that represent us right now. So, to solve the problem, we have to start by cutting off the funding to the politicians from the industry that's supporting the status quo. Second, the way that we're going to get there is we got to take baby steps. We can't just say, hey, I'm going to jump into single payer system or Medicare for all. It's too big of a problem for the federal government to bite off at one time. So the way that we got to do it is let's start with a common rate sheet, whether that's for your healthcare services or your prescriptions. So that's an area where we can say, all right, we have something like Medicare that kind of gives us that. Let's make sure that that becomes universal so that we know that if we're going into a hospital in Oregon, it's going to be the same as South Carolina, give or take maybe a few percentage points for location, but it's going to be the same in Maryland too. To say that you're out of network and now you're all of a sudden charged a 50% increase or multiple 100% increase, which it's been in some cases, is unfathomable. Prescription drug plan is in the same boat. If other countries have negotiated for lower rates, we should be able to as well. Finally, to help the people local, Maryland would be benefited if we can have purchasing insurance through associations. Right now, Maryland doesn't allow that. Some states do. I think if there's a federal allowance for that, that would help significantly. Thank you.
I think healthcare is a right, plain and simple. I think we're all going to be on Medicare sooner rather than later and look in the rearview mirror and wonder what took so long. There are a number of plans to expand Medicare. One I would support is from a think tank in Washington, D.C. called Center for American Progress. It does 3 things. It brings Medicaid and CHIP underneath the Medicare umbrella. It allows an opt-in option for individuals or small businesses to purchase an insurance policy through Medicare. And the last thing is it allows Medicare to negotiate drug prices, like the VA, with the pharmaceutical industries. There are 54,000 people in our district who rely on the ACA. 54,000 people. Andy Harris has tried to repeal the ACA every chance he could with no backup plan. There are also 50,000 jobs in our district in the healthcare industry. It's the largest employer. If the ACA were to go away tomorrow, 35% of those jobs would go away. There's something called an ALICE family. ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. It's basically the family who's one carburetor away from having to choose next month between paying for your rent and paying for medicine. In our district, it's 37% of working families. 37% of working families in our district are one carburetor away. The first step has to be protecting those 54,000 people, and then we have to get back to how do we get everybody insured. Thank you very much. There are 535 members of Congress, and there is one district with the Chesapeake Bay. But it's not just the Bay, because we have the Bay and its rivers and its tributaries and an entire way of life here. We are not a district of smokestacks, and we are not a district of computer chips. We used to have the Bay's and its way of life's #1 defender, #1 champion, #1 supporter of in Congress. His name was Congressman Wayne Gilchrist. We are incredibly proud to have his endorsement, and we don't agree on everything. He's still a Republican, and I'm a Democrat, but we definitely agree on the environment. What needs to be done? The EPA is going to require rigorous oversight. In the same fashion that the Department of Education, led right now by Secretary DeVos, will require rigorous oversight. What can we do? We can muster every ounce of political energy and political courage that we have and bring that to as much rigorous oversight as we can to the Office of the EPA the next 2 years.
So all the teeth of the EPA have been pulled from it. That's causing a bit of a problem for us as Americans. We were promised a long time ago that we were going to have water safety in the 1970s, where we could swim in any body of water in the United States. We haven't gotten far in that endeavor for many reasons. We have conflicting interests across the country. Jesse mentioned how, coal stacks don't care about oysters. Well, it kind of goes that way all over the country. You only care about what you know here and now. And we care about the Chesapeake Bay. We care about soil nutrients applied at the farms that trickle their way into the bay and affect life in the bay. We do wonderful things at a state level to control that. My view of how things should change should be, we should look at high impact areas, something like the Chesapeake Bay that is affected by a watershed that extends through Pennsylvania and New York. And we should consider those zones. And the EPA should be able to say, hey, for this zone, these are the programs that we need to have that we care about. And block grants should be a mechanism that should be highly employed in and across the country to address local issues for those environmental issues that we care about. I think it's inappropriate to say, hey, we have one policy that goes across the country and it should be uniformly applied when the concerns in different parts of the country are very different. So I think block grants are an important aspect of it, and I think that we need to have more teeth in what the EPA can do to stop in those local regions. Thank you.
So I think part of your question was, should we give more money to the EPA to take and do enforcement? Would that be a good summary, Brian?
Well, an example was to increase the power of the agency and its budget.
See, the agency right now has tremendous power and has tremendous regulations. What's going on right now is we have a president who has installed someone into the EPA who's not willing to enforce those regulations. There's dangerous chemicals that are prohibited, that would harm pregnant women and children. And yet we have a regulation on the book that says we need to take and control that. It's not being done. We have other regulations that the EPA has on the books as far as protecting, really kind of helping with the climate through control of coal and the rest of it, but we're pushing coal. So it's not that we don't have the regulations, it's that the current body does not have the will and doesn't want to take and enforce those things. So I think the EPA is a great enforcer, can be a great enforcer, will be a great enforcer. And I think Jesse said it probably best when he said, we need to change the Congress so that we can push those types of agencies to do things. So long as it's a Republican Congress, so long as President Trump is pulling the strings of Mr. Pruitt, those things aren't going to change. So I think there's adequate rules, regulations, potential for enforcement. I think it's just not being done.
So I'm a strong environmental supporter. When I was the county attorney, I developed a local ordinance for Talbot County that was so effective in enforcing the environmental protection for the Chesapeake Bay that the following year, the Maryland General Assembly adopted that as a model and put that into effect statewide. And that model still exists today to protect the bay throughout the state. And I'm also very proud to have been endorsed by the Sierra Club for my environmental stand. So our current congressman wanted to, well, the current administration wanted to zero out the Chesapeake Bay Protection Program. $73 million, remove it, zero it out. Andy Harris agreed to reduce it by $13 million. That's not the kind of representative we need. The larger picture, I think the EPA regulations do work. I think they are essential to protect our bay and to protect our health and the health of our children, grandchildren, etc. I don't think that we need necessarily to change the legislative framework, but we do need to make sure that the person who's in charge of the EPA is enforcing those regulations. In the next 2 years, if the Democrats take the House, Elijah Cummings becomes chair of the House Oversight Committee. That committee has jurisdiction over all of the executive agencies, and Scott Pruitt can be brought in, and he can be questioned. He can be subpoenaed, and he can be questioned about his failure to enforce the existing regulations that's killing our children, polluting our air and our water.
I do believe that it is a function of the federal government, and I agree with Steve that the EPA already does have teeth, or, you know, it has the ability to enforce these regulations, and they're opting not to do it. So it is a matter of taking back Congress and making sure that we have some people in there who are going to stand up and say, enough, we're not doing this. We're not going to destroy our environment. We're not going to endanger our families. We're not going to endanger our children. And I would say that pollution does not respect state lines. And so we do have to have the legislation at the federal level. For example, take our Maryland farmers have done quite a lot to be very responsible and to not have excessive pesticides running off into the bay and to control their spraying, and have gone a great lengths towards sustainable farming, which is better for our environment. Except we don't have the same requirements coming from Pennsylvania or New York, and that ends up in our bay also. We need to make sure that we have federal legislation that's going to balance some of these things and make sure that we're protecting and preserving our environment. And then you have things like the Monsanto and Bayer merger, where you have massive corporations who are involved in Congress and have power in Congress, who are being allowed to combine forces and create monopolies. We need to also do something about that. It extends beyond the EPA, and we do need a responsible Congress and a member of Congress who is going to fight back against this kind of thing.
The Eastern Shore has a bit of a challenge in that question, in that there's not many interstates riding through the Eastern Shore. We have 95 that goes through. So as far as federal infrastructure, we're in a little bit of a challenge there, that Maryland's a little bit left on its own. That said, people from around the country are going to be riding on our roads, whether they're going to the beach, or they're going down to Virginia, or they're just visiting family. The bottom line is, we do have a federal responsibility to the welfare and safety of Americans, regardless of what state they're traveling to or from. This comes back to an area where block grants make sense. I think the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration should have the greatest insight to figure out where the most vulnerable bridges, I would trust, is the crux of this question, are within our district, and what activity needs to happen to repair them. I think we're seeing lots of local activity, and I think a combination of NHTSA's effort plus some block grant programs that would come out of Congress is the right way to handle this type of thing. I think they're going to be in different states of degradation across the country, and I think we put a rating system out there, and we put the money where it's needed the worst right now. Thank you.
So that's quite the conundrum. How do you build infrastructure at the same time that the corporate tax rates adjustments and money's given to the rich and the wealthy has gone up so much, but now we're having trillion-dollar deficits, and the GDP is now smaller than the United States' entire federal deficit, because we're going to be at about $27 trillion. So the current path is not sustainable. But by the same token, we really need to take and fix our infrastructure. So what do? Well, we don't really want to take and increase the deficit anymore. So what do you fix? Well, first, if you invest in the infrastructure, the one thing that's going to happen is you're going to give a lot of jobs to people, and you're going to grow the economy. when you do that, that's actually going to help to offset some of those dollars. So if you were to put $1 trillion into taking and rebuilding roads and bridges, looking at the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, etc., then you have the opportunity to take and recover some of that money you invest. But I also think that we need to reverse what we've done on the corporate tax rate that went from 35% to 21%. That money went nowhere that was given back to the corporations and the rich. It went into their pockets, it went into stocks, it went into rebuys. Nothing went back into the economy. I am all for raising the corporate tax rate from 21% to a different number, perhaps 28%, to recover some of those dollars, to be able to pay for the infrastructure, which will then also help to take and grow the economy. So that would, in fact, with the federal dollars that came in, help to take and pay for anything that we would need on the Eastern Shore and throughout Maryland and the United States.
So I agree that we need to invest in our infrastructure, which will grow our economy, and I think the question becomes how to pay for that. The recent tax scam passed by the Republicans put a $1.5 trillion deficit on the books, and the first thing that I would try to do is to repeal that. The reason is that 84% of those benefits go to the top 1%. The numbers for next year's tax returns, the bottom 20% is going to get about an average of $60 back. The middle 20% is going to get an average of $960 back. The top 1/10% is going to get an average of, listen to this, $190,000 back. So this was simply a tax giveaway to the top 1/10%. That money, now that it's no longer in the Treasury, or will not be in the Treasury, is not available for the infrastructure spending that we sorely need. I would reverse that, use the funding to build our infrastructure, which will in fact build our economy. It will give our people jobs. It will create more efficiencies in the economy and allow better, more efficient production of goods and services and delivery of those goods and services. And it will increase our standard of living. So I think we need to focus on the middle class and the working class and the infrastructure, eliminate the tax giveaways to the top 1/10%.
Investments in infrastructure, whether it be physical or digital infrastructure such as rural broadband, they have a significantly high return on investment, much higher than most investments that we could choose to make. And it does create jobs, and it does help to grow the economy. And I would say that it's imperative that we have these investments on the shore because we have problems like chronic flooding and rising sea levels, and we need to make sure that infrastructure is able to address that here locally. So in addition to increasing the corporate tax rate and closing some of these tax loopholes, I would look at federal acquisition reform. The federal government is a glorified contract manager, basically. They manage a lot of contracts, and then they do program management functions. Except the Clinton administration gutted the acquisition force in the 1990s, and it's never recovered. So you have agencies who are awarding all these contracts, but they don't have the expertise or the personnel that they need to effectively structure contracts, to make sure that industry is actually going to perform, to make sure that we're using money valuably, wisely, and to make sure that we're actually making sense out of what money we're spending in defense. Also, if you fix the budget process, we blow billions of dollars a year just by not approving a budget on time. If you can straighten out how the federal government is operating and make sense out of it, then you can save a tremendous amount of money. And you can take that money and then you can reinvest it into the programs that we so desperately need, like infrastructure and our social programs and the ones that give back to our communities.
We have a crisis in infrastructure in the mid and lower shore. So go look up the American Civil Society of Engineers grades for the bridges in the mid shore and the lower shore. You're going to see D-, Ds, and D+. We need 3 types of investments in infrastructure. We need Eisenhower-esque infrastructure. We need digital, rural broadband. Broadband, it's a education issue. It is a racial and socioeconomic inequality issue. It is an entrepreneurship issue. We also need, for lack of a better term, the Dave Harp and Tom Horton Dorchester County bill for infrastructure for Dorchester County. Because the rising sea level, Dorchester is going to be in serious trouble as soon as 15 to 20 years from now. How do we pay for it? Two things. Number one, we absolutely need a new tax bill. We need a re-reform for the tax bill. The second thing is there is fat to be trimmed from the Department of Defense budget. That might sound counterintuitive from the Army Rangers who served 4 combat deployments in Afghanistan, but I will tell you, talk to a veteran in my generation. There are over 100 of us running for Congress this year. We are angry because we understand that what kept us alive in Afghanistan was not that fancy Joint Strike Fighter that is 20 years over budget and $50 billion over budget. It just wasn't. And I'm also a new father. I have a 2-month-old at home. I know I don't want to drive my son over bridges with D+ ratings just as much as you don't want your grandkids or kids or nieces or nephews or neighbors doing the exact same thing. We need traditional infrastructure, we need digital infrastructure, and Dorchester needs help. Thank you.
The way you beat Andy Harris is you beat him on the issues, and you have to be able to get out there and present them, obviously. So we talked about this last week when we were in Cecil County, and I say the quickest way to get to anybody is through their pocketbook. So we understood that the watermen used to endorse Andy Harris. I say used to, because now we understand that he didn't do anything to help with the H-1B visas to get the folks up here to help with the folks that are doing the crabbing and the picking. So now we don't have enough people to handle it. So what did Andy do? He didn't do anything. So I guess maybe the watermen aren't really in his back pocket anymore. How about the farmers? There's a lot of them over here. They probably voted for him. Well, geez, Trump's going after the tariffs now, so that's great. He put steel, aluminum. We're going after them. But what did that do for the farmers? They didn't do a heck of a lot for the soy prices, right? So now the farmers maybe aren't as happy. Then you start looking at the people that need care, health care. All right, well, they want to repeal or make unconstitutional the people with pre-existing conditions. Andy wants to take and kill the Affordable Care Act, and the prices are going through the roof, so they tried to repeal it, but they didn't do anything to fix it. So that's okay, it'll cost the middle class more, but don't worry, at the same time, we gave all that money to the corporations and the rich. What are we doing about wind, and what are we doing about climate? The folks here talked about the rising water. With the carbon footprint, nothing's changing. Andy's all for offshore drilling, except he doesn't want the wind off of Ocean City. So I think you beat Andy Harris very simply on the pocketbook and on the issues. And if you can take and present those and stand in front of them, you can beat them.
Our campaign has recognized from day one that this is a get out the vote campaign. We've put together a strategy of door knocking and phone banking, and I see plenty of volunteers on our campaign here in the audience. And we've been doing that since last August. We've knocked on doors and phone banked, and our view is that when people get a chance to meet the candidates, to see the candidates, to understand what the position is, that touch, that personal touch, means that they will get engaged. We've got such wind at our backs this election cycle. This is the cycle that any one of the Democrats on this table is head and shoulders above Harris, and we are going to support one another. We are going to get behind the nominee, and we are going to push the nominee over the edge, over the top. Our strategy has been to we've got the voter lists, we've gone through all the lists, we're making contacts with voters, because we believe that that's where the payoff of the effort really is. It's that direct personal contact, particularly on the Eastern Shore. Our view is that if we can win the Eastern Shore, that our campaign can win the nomination. And so that's where we're focused. And if we win the nomination, then we're going to take on Harris because of the reasons that Steve mentioned. Harris does not represent the interest of his constituency. His wind power positions on the Ocean City wind farm, perfect example. He tried to kill it by prohibiting the EPA to do the environmental impact study. When that failed, He's now got a second writer in to try to postpone it for another 2 years for additional study. It's transparent, and it's wrong.
Thank you.
My story is much different than anybody else up here as to why I'm running, and that actually gives me the best chance of taking out Harris. Can you imagine billboards on Route 50 and all over this district saying Andy Harris doesn't think most people would mind if women paid more for health insurance? Nobody is going to like that from either party. You might get a few, but no woman wants to hear it. No woman wants to hear that's what their congressman says. That's my story. This is personal for me. I am truly middle class. I'm a single mom. People can relate to me. 20% of the voters in the entire district, are literally in my backyard in Harford County, where I grew up in this district and graduated from a public high school, graduated from University of Maryland for both bachelor's degree, and then I returned there for my graduate coursework, which was in public policy. And my bachelor's degree was in philosophy with a focus in ethics and logic. And that appeals to people because my ideas are not partisan. I don't care which side of the aisle a good idea comes from or a bad idea comes from. It is still a good or a bad idea. So beyond being able to talk to anybody and focusing on authenticity and integrity and actually being honest about who you are as a candidate and as a person and having a personal story, I also have the strongest track record of flipping voters. My campaign flipped hundreds of Republicans to Democrat for this primary. We can do this. I have the skills and I have the story, and I am a different enough candidate from Andy Harris that people will go, oh, whoa, something new, something changed. We can do this together.
This is how you win. First off, this is a referendum on Andy Harris. This is not left versus right. This is not Democrats versus Republicans. We discovered early on, if you regret your vote for the president, you're already coming. No need to throw it in your face. Step one is he has $1 million war chest. Our campaign outraised him in our first quarter of campaigning. Nobody had any idea who I was, and I did it without taking any corporate PAC money. Step two is, let's talk about the issues. People still remember the Superstorm Sandy vote. People still remember that he's trying to repeal health care for those 54,000 people, and they are left, right, and center. We are outworking him. I'm doing 600 miles a week as the candidate in my truck. I have spent time with watermen, spent time with oyster farmers, gone to farms. I have eaten muskrat at the National Outdoor Show. Showing up counts, and listening well counts even more. Our staff is tired to the bone. We have about 260 volunteers right now, many of whom are in the room. And the last thing I told them was, the next time I see you, you need to be missing toenails, because you're out knocking that many doors. This is a gerrymandered district. A Democrat was never supposed to win. For a Democrat to win, you need to knit together a community, a coalition from the far left to the center to the disaffected right. We are endorsed by a Bernie Sanders chapter. We are endorsed by the AFL-CIO. We are endorsed by a national organization called Vote Vets. And the disaffected right is Wayne Gilchrist. We're incredibly proud and humble for that endorsement. The Connor Lamb special election in Pennsylvania is the blueprint for this race. Connor Lamb won the special election. He's a young Marine in Pennsylvania. It is a very, very similar district. He ran against a guy that had 8 years of a voting record. We all know Harris's voting record. And the last thing is, we're going to win in this room because this guy in the room named Dave. Dave is I'm going to put you on blast, Dave, I'm sorry. Dave is a registered Republican. He lives in Harford County. His wife got a mailer in the mail and was so interested, he drove across the bridge today to come check us out. And he wants to volunteer. That's how we do this thing. So Dave, I hope you would like to volunteer with us.
I'm pretty sure that I'm probably a neighbor of Dave. I come from northern Harford County. I live in the reddest part of probably the district. I am definitely an outcast in my own neighborhood. But that said, here's what we care about. We care about taxes, we care about guns, we being the red side of the voting bloc. If we threaten their guns, we have no chance at taking Andy's seat, period. The district is so gerrymandered that red is going to vote red most of the time. That said, there's a wide swath of moderates that, with the right messaging, understanding that we're not going to add taxes to their bill, we're not going to take away their guns, we have an opportunity. And we need to find a candidate that's out there and willing to say that out loud and be seen saying that. There's all these other soft topics that we as Democrats embrace. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not going to catch their attention. We say, hey, we want you to hear this great story that we have. Well, that great story doesn't matter if you're against guns. It's not going to change your vote, right? There's a reason why the NRA is in his back pocket. Because the people here vote for that. The people here are part of that. We have to be realistic about what's going to happen. I'm an endurance athlete. I expect to be on this trail for not just this cycle, for the next cycle and the next cycle. Because it's going to take a long time to get that message out. If we're spending our time getting that message out for one cycle, or the next 3 or 4 months, are we really going to get enough people? Maybe. We're hoping that the blue wave is going to be large enough. I hope so. We've made a promise to one another that we are going to go out there kicking and screaming to everybody that we can find that will listen to us, because we as 5 are going to beat Andy Harris, not we as 1. And that has to be true of all the Democrats in this room. We have to find our moderate Republican friends, and we need to make a point that they hear about what our message is and why we're doing this. That change is going to come, and we're going to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lane.